John will do the mic, but let's begin where Barry left off, because obviously one of the major questions that we're left with after your presentations were, why the state? What is the role of government in the sense of fostering economic development? Why doesn't the market handle these kinds of investments? Because after all, and I'm not the economist, Barry is, but I learned enough by listening to him over the years that in theory, in terms of the way markets work, if there is a good idea, somebody will invest in it and therefore make a profit when the company in which the investment is made makes a profit. So there's an element of risk. And maybe that's the point. So what is it in particular, Susan, about the life sciences that would require the state to become, if not a lender of first resort, at least a contributor to the sector? Chuck, how does this play within the larger framework of investment capital, risk-taking, and why does the state end up being an actor within this larger picture?
So why the state? Life sciences has a risky path to market. It takes a long time. Why? Because we're balancing the public safety issue with the efficacy issue. I mean, how many drugs do we know of that have been pulled from the market, right? I mean, even after extensive testing, et cetera. So it takes a while to bring a drug to the market. And as a result, sometimes investors are slow. They want to wait until the development is at a certain point because they're looking to make a financial return. So why the state? What is it that we think we can do? We think that we can come in at a point where there is some risk. We can do so responsibly, but we can come in at a point to help companies get to a point where other financial investors will consider them a good financial risk. We've got the ability, the clout, the imprimatur, if you will, to pull together experts from all across the state to help us look at these early stage investments and identify the ones that are promising. And I will say very quickly, per Chuck's point, why are there VCs on our advisory board? Because the VCs will help mentor the companies that we fund. So what we think that we can do, or we should be doing, as a quasi-public agency, is to come in when things are a bit riskier, to help attract financing. If we invest, then our experience has been that other investors will come in. Why? They're leveraging our dollars. And I think also we have the ability to encourage and bring in other resources to bring to bear on the drug company.
Can I do a quick follow-up before Chuck goes in? How does Massachusetts compare to other states in terms of these kinds of this kind of a quasi-public agency?
Our our initiative, if you will, it really is quite unique. There are other states. The one you would hear about the most would be California, which is investing billions of dollars in stem cell research. It's all focused on academics. What's unique about our program is that we can compete with pretty much any other program or investment that other states are making. Tax incentives, which states like North Carolina and Ohio use to compete for biomanufacturing jobs. We can make grants, but we are uniquely focused on young companies. And that really is, we are focused on small businesses, company creation, and early stage companies. And that is very unique in Massachusetts.
Why the state? First of all, a venture capital company's third question to you when you go to see them about investment is, what's your China strategy? Which means, how can you offshore jobs right away to reduce your cost? So they're not interested in creating jobs in the Commonwealth. They're interested in return, which is their job. They're interested in return for their investors. So they're looking to find a 30 to 40, 50% annual compounded rate of return, and the one way to find that is reduce your labor cost by outsourcing jobs. So that takes care of VCs. With banks, small loans are inherently risky because they sometimes do fail. If loans fail, banks have to increase their loan loss reserve. If you increase your loan loss reserve, you have to reduce your net income. If you reduce your net income, your price-earnings ratio drops. If your PE ratio drops, your stock value drops. Your stock value drops, you are susceptible to takeover or to not getting a bonus that year. So The answer is that only the state has the interest in creating jobs without the return value, but we want some fair return, but without the net return that both VC firms, private investors, private equity firms, and banks. Private equity firms have gone beyond venture capital firms because their first step, the second step after buying a company is to try to reduce the current payroll in a local company. They would mind laying off half the employees, that will increase their return by 20%. So there is nobody else except the public sector that is interested in creating jobs and is willing to take a risk in doing it in the right way. What we're hoping is that by showing banks that we can reduce their risk by using the right resources and assistance level to small companies, we can reduce their risk and they'll be more willing to take risks with us. But that's the reason, to me, why the state has to step in. Both the state, the federal government, and the city governments have to step in.
Okay, let's open up for questions from the audience. Anybody?
I have one while people are waiting for one.
Yeah.
At what size of company, in terms of revenues, does a company gain the ability to take advantage of doing corporate bonds, that kind of thing?
Well, a company can be profitable at any level. I have once loaned to a company who was making handmade furniture in Cambridge, limitless design. He was happy doing $500,000 a year. And I said, don't you want to increase your revenue by creating furniture that folds up like IKEA is doing now? He said, no, $500,000 a year is fine. That's my lifestyle. He was happy. So lifestyle, it can be lifestyle companies with revenues at that level. There can be companies that are profitable at any level, depending on the wishes of the owner. And it really doesn't.
I mean, is there a size where they become eligible where it makes sense to be able to get capital by issuing a bond instead of going to the bank or VC? Like the big companies, they do corporate bonds.
There's banks. You should be able to get capital at any level. There should be a $5,000 loan available if that's what you need, but there isn't. You have to go to find some micro lender, maybe in the western part of the state or in Somerville or someplace. But you should be able to find capital at any level if you have a viable idea and a plan and are working hard and willing to do it. I don't think there should be any size limitation on where for capital for any company that's going to create a job or employ somebody.
If you have questions on there. Please state your name and.
Hi, my name is Globiana. I'm glad to see that we are setting up Massachusetts as a life sciences endeavor. Do we also have programs for, say, green energy or something else? And if so, in what ways are these such programs implementable at the state level as opposed to the national?
We have we call it a sister agency that is the Clean Energy Center, a very similar mission to ours, but focused on the clean tech cluster in the state. And so they are doing very similar kinds of things, investing in young companies. They are stewarding some of the dollars that came as part of the economic stimulus package to retrain individuals to go out and to do energy audits and to really learn about clean technology. They've put a great consortium together that has successfully competed and won some very significant grants from the federal government in the area of clean technology. So yes, the state considers that to be another one of the innovation economy sectors and is making some similar investments.
Martin Evans, you mentioned earlier that Massachusetts, North Carolina, and Ohio are one in the business of providing tax incentives. Isn't this just a futile race to the bottom where all suffer through reduced tax receipts?
So would you repeat the question? I'm sorry.
Sure.
Isn't
Everyone is giving tax incentives.
Correct.
Isn't this just a race to the bottom where everyone is getting less revenue from their taxes?
I'll tell you how we look at tax incentives. Our goal ultimately is to recoup these dollars for the state through the creation of jobs and through ultimately payroll taxes and income taxes that are being paid by the additional workers that are being created. So many states don't tie tax incentives to job creation. There's not a lot of monitoring of what happens with those incentives. They use them to attract a company. The company comes, maybe they stay, maybe they don't, maybe they create jobs, maybe they don't. We are very intentionally, and I think very systematically at the Life Sciences Center, and this is becoming more and more the way that Massachusetts is handling all of its tax incentives. We're using them as motivating factors to get companies to invest. And in exchange for the investment and the support of their investment, we're looking for job creation. So we're looking for investments that create jobs. So I can tell you that for the incentives that we awarded last year, we know from our calculations and from DOR's calculations, and in 5 years those incentives will have paid for themselves in terms of an increase in the revenues to the state through the jobs that have been created and the salaries that will be paid. So we're looking not just at the jobs being created, how much will those jobs pay?
Hi, I'm Morris Cunningham. I wonder how insulated from politics these sorts of things can be. The big economic development story in the last year, one of them was casinos, and that fell on whether to put slots at tracks, which is a dying industry. Sadly enough, since I'm a lifetime $2 better, but a dying industry. And I can readily see a phone call coming from somebody who might say, you know, I happen to represent Worcester, where we have a medical center, and I see that a grant just went to Harvard. And I don't represent Harvard. And so I wonder how insulated decision making can be.
That's a great question. Our board, our scientific advisory board, the fact that all of the awards at the center are awarded based on competitive solicitation means that we have a great amount of control over the decisions that we make. Now, I'll be very candid. Do we ever get inquiries from the legislature or from other political factions asking about investments in their various communities? Of course, we do. But we've got a very rigorous process. We have stuck with that process. Our board has been wonderful about helping us hold the line on the way in which we make decisions. And again, all of our awards have been based on a competitive process, even the tax incentives. Applications come in, we look at what companies are proposing to do, how they're proposing to use the incentives, and we make decisions based on the best use of the incentive for the jobs that are going to be created. It's the same with our loans, the same with our grants. It's all a competitive process. That scientific advisory board, it's very hard for anyone to go and question the decisions by that group. We have about 100 peer reviewers from all around the state who are the first round of reviewers on all of our applications. So all of our decisions are very, very rooted in the expertise that is around the state. It makes it very, very hard for anyone to come and put a lot of pressure on us to make decisions that are purely in response to political concerns.
Let me follow up that, be a little provocative for a moment, I hope. I mean, one could argue that a purely peer review process, similar to NSF or National Institutes for Health, that kind of process, rewards only those who already are established. I mean, and one could argue that what's wrong with a little politics in these kind of decisions to invest in parts of the state where there may not be investment, to take risks where no one else may be willing to take risks. So I guess to follow Professor Cunningham a bit, it's laudable that the Institute is shielded from the most gross and overt kinds of politics, but at what point is there actually any kind of consideration for economic development in the classic sense?
I think that's a great question, and so here's where I will circle back to our mission, because our mission is economic development across Massachusetts. And part of what we always are considering, and our advisors share with us in considering, is what's the best use of our dollars? And it may be that it is a better use of our dollars to make an investment in Raynham or New Bedford or Pittsfield than it is in Cambridge. Cambridge will be able to attract those dollars otherwise, perhaps. So when our reviewers are reviewing for us as part of their scorecard, they do have questions about the what if and the economic development impacts. So that if you, interestingly enough, 80% of our investments have been outside the Route 128 area, and we are looking very hard at different needs around the state and the potential for different parts of the state. So that is factored into the decision that we make. And I'll just getting back to what about those that aren't well established. We have a number of programs that target very early stage companies and projects, and so that's a big part of what we're factoring in. We've really tried to look broadly and come up with something that addresses all those different steps, but absolutely the economic development impact and the relative best use of our dollars is a big part of the way in which we make our decisions.
Jeff, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I have experiences that I've been approached by politicians many times to make a loan and to look at a project, to look at a company. And with rare exception, if I go look at the company and go look at the problem and then go back to the politician and say, here's why I can or cannot make that loan, they're okay. What they want to sell is access to the decision. They don't want the decision, they want to override the decision. They want to sell it to the constituent that they have access to that decision. And if I sit with them and say, I can't make a loan to that company because they're bankrupt, or because they're falling off the cliff, or because they don't have a product, or because he's a liar, or whatever the issue is, they're okay. As long as I tell them the logical reason why I can't make the loan and why I can't invest in it. They're really selling access to their constituents and they're okay with it. It's with rare exceptions. There are some exceptions to that, but that's the usual experience.
If I'm just going to add, I think that's a really good point. We will often look to see what else we could do to help. Maybe we can give the companies some mentorship. Someone can review and give them some feedback to help make it a stronger application. So sometimes there are other things that you can do. That's a very fair point. What politicians are looking for is to demonstrate that they can make something happen on behalf of their constituents.
John?
Hi, Mike Crawford. Getting back to the politics issue, if, say, a new administration does come in, and could you find yourself having a budget cut to the point where you can't achieve your mission?
That's a very, very good question. If a new administration comes in, I think we will see, the extent to which the administration thinks that at least our initiative is an important one. A reminder that we were created by the legislature. So at the end of the day, it is really the legislature that determines our funding, but it certainly makes it helpful if we have a supportive governor who would put us in his budget as well. Our attitude is the following. We have really highly leveraged our dollars, and it's getting to the point where some of the access that we can provide, the oversight, the convening, provides good leverage even for very, very small amounts of dollars. So I think what we will continue to do is keep focusing on our priorities and looking for ways in which we can still meet our objectives with relatively few dollars. So I think that one of the advantages that we have, and again, it's why the state, is we have broad reach, broad access. We've really been able to get a lot of the different parts of the life sciences community engaged with us. There are lots of other organizations that have money, and often they will put their money behind what we're doing because they see the benefit of it, even if we as the state agency or the quasi can't fund it. So the way that we like to position this is we don't think that it will get to the point where we cannot achieve our mission, but the opportunity cost is against those 6,500 jobs, if you will, or the $700 million of additional investment capital that we've been able to attract. So it's more of an opportunity cost than our being totally enabled to get anything done.
There are three safeguards against that event for Massachusetts Capital Corporation. First is that it's now a statute, it's now a law that this should be funded at these levels. Second, the board has a staggered term, so a new governor could not get control of the board for several years. Third, the director of the agency should have a contract for at least a year. And fourth, we spent a lot of time getting the Mass Bankers Association on board with the idea. So they want this to happen. And they see this as benefiting their small lending programs, and they want to see this happen and want to see how it works for them. And so we've got a lot of pressures that a new governor will have to overcome to say, stop the show.
Can I pose a question to Chuck especially, but also to Susan if you want to answer it? If you're advising the new governor, whoever the governor is, whether it's Governor Patrick or Mr. Baker, or perhaps even Mr. Cahill, or Ms. Stein, what if you're going to advise on economic development strategy for the state for the next 4 years? Given what we're talking about, innovation economy, the kinds of need to have access, equity around the state for people, especially in areas that we don't have economic development, what kinds of programs or what kind of strategies would you recommend to the governor, given your experiences?
Growth comes organically, usually, within a state. There aren't very many Mercedes plants that are going to relocate here. There aren't very many big companies that are going to relocate here. But you do get growth internally from companies that are already here who find they have access to working capital, their permitting for expansion is easier, that they can develop projects easier, that they can get some tax credits for doing some things, that they can grow here in an easier way without the same obstructions they usually have. So I would, as a simple answer, initially have the governor focus on organic growth of existing companies and existing industries, because they're already here, they like it here, they want to be here, the workforce is here. And second, I would spend a lot more time with community colleges and with the educational system to aim young people at these skills. Every student is not going to be a nuclear physicist that he or she want to be. There's another aspect. The arts system and the arts community in this area is very well developed. I spent some time with the Boston Society of Architects. We give grants to schools and to young groups to help young people get interested in design and design issues and construction and related issues. Young people learn in very different ways. Some of them need to learn through designing something or building something or crafting something. Young people need to learn in all the ways they need to learn. So we need to find the ways to connecting the arts community and the building communities and the financial communities to energizing young kids in a way that will help them aim them at the current jobs and the existing jobs and the growth industries in the state in a way that really works. They're not all going to go off and do something with a nuclear plant somewhere, but they will act with companies here to grow. So we've got to do a much better job of knitting the communities in the area together. The arts community, the financial community, the construction community, the design communities, to knit them together, and there are ways to do that. Paul Grogan, for instance, the Boston Foundation, has done a very good job in using a foundation to bring pieces together to be a convener. We need to do more of that. So I think there are ways to find those conveners to bring the pieces of this society together in ways that we haven't done before.
I would agree. Again, as I think you can hear, we are trying to find ways to support organic growth. We are also trying to find ways to function as a partner with the investment community as well as the business community, as opposed to just a regulatory entity. So I think all of those are very important. I do believe, at least as far as life sciences are concerned, that being able to offer some incentives that encourage companies to expand their presence here. Yes, they come because of our talented workforce, they come because of the tremendous academic institutions here, but they also are looking for competitive locations in which to locate parts of their businesses, and to the extent that we do want to compete for some of these biomanufacturing jobs, these advanced manufacturing jobs, I think our ability to offer incentives that attract companies to expand their presence here is important. I will just also agree very much with the need to support our community colleges and vocational schools. We at the center, in fact, have just opened a grant program. We're going to make $2 million available only to community colleges and voc tech schools to hire state-of-the-art equipment to train workers. And so now we're really talking in many cases about not 4-year programs, but 2-year programs, or reskilling or community-based training programs. So that's something that I think we can do. I very much agree on the importance of those institutions.
Just I had one thought. I think the second thing I'd do is kill gambling as a possibility, and to get back to the real creating products and creating processes and creating companies that work with productivity as opposed to easy money that doesn't really do what it's supposed to do. It creates more problems than it's gonna. We are 27th in the world in math and science studies right now. That's criminal. We're 16th in the world in graduation rates. That's criminal. We need to get back to the basics of what made the state great, and we're not there. So I think we need to just get rid of the false promise of easy money, easy quick gambling. When I was a kid, my dad raised horses, and he raced horses around the fairgrounds around the region. And I was 6 years old. He said, "Dad, I'm going to show you how to bet." He said, "You pick a horse, and I'll pick a horse." So he put $2 on his horse, $2 on my horse. The horse I picked, the jockey fell off at the very first turn. The horse he picked finished dead last. And I said, "Dad, I understand gambling. I understand gambling." The first thing I would do is get gambling off the table as a false source of revenue because it's more trouble than for it.
Yes, I'm Margaret Dyson. I had a question about, we talked about the political pressures, but is there also, with this wonderful board and these great peer reviewers and these advisors, do you find that you have challenges with some of your advisors needing to recuse themselves from decisions because they're involved in the product or the process? And on the flip side, do you find yourself losing opportunities to work with outstanding companies or organizations because they're represented on your board or your advisors?
That's a great question. Everyone works with the center. Our board members, our other advisors, peer reviewers sign a conflict of interest agreement, and they must recuse themselves if there's any conflict of interest. And everyone takes that really quite seriously. In fact, board members will step out of the room. Not only will they not be involved in the discussion, they must physically recuse themselves, as will our SAB members. So in this way, we're trying to find a balance between still accessing the talent, but if there's an investment that really involves their institution, their company, then they must really recuse themselves from that. And I've been really quite impressed with people adhering to that. So that's how we're getting around it, so that we can still work with the vast array of talent, but to do so appropriately, and to do so in a way that anyone who's applying to the center doesn't feel as if they will immediately be knocked out of the box because there's someone from a competitor organization that's involved in the process in some way. Does that answer your question?
Yes, we're here.
I understand the state's Ruth Rivals. I understand the state's interest in promoting life sciences and green energy, but there are plenty of companies that are innovative and have great potential that don't do those things. That still need capital and still need to find a way to grow in Massachusetts. What does the state, what does anybody offer other than the bank, and I would call them vulture capitals?
That's, I think the answer to your question is that's why it's named Mass Growth Capital Corporation. What we've persuaded the board to do is to not have one product, but to have a whole menu of products. Some companies may need money that looks more like equity. It's more patient capital. It's not venture capital, but it's patient capital. Some companies may need just a collateral infusion. Some companies may need money to buy a building. We need to have a whole range of menus for companies to use, and not any one product. The other thing is we plan to use a team approach. The best 5 lenders in the group will form the team to make a decision, so that all the best reasoning will come to bear on every deal. If one person doesn't think of a product, the next person will think of that product. So we'll have a team approach to figure out how to finance any one company and get it done quickly. So the answer to your question is a company that does something differently should have a source of capital unique to that company to fit that company's need. This can do it.
Okay.
Chuck, if I could follow up, but also I take it the Mass Growth Capital Corporation, maybe unlike the Mass Life Sciences Center, will be looking across industries, across sectors,
Yes.
manufacturing, it can be all kinds of things. Is that right?
Correct. And I will say too that we're trying very hard to make the Life Sciences Center the stop at the quasi-public group for life sciences companies, so that there's really not a lot of double dipping, so that other sectors have other programs on which they can rely. And regarding the Vulture capitalists, we really do protect our applicants. If they do not want VCs to be looking at their applications or involved in any way, then they will sign a statement. In other words, everyone has to give their approval for the VCs to be involved and to be looking at them. Most of them are very welcoming of the support and the mentoring, but we really are trying to protect young companies so that they're getting the support that they need and they're not being taken advantage of.
We got a question.
Simon Sandvik. My question is, how far out do you monitor or require reporting for the businesses that you invest in? And then is there any concern that maybe once a business starts to grow and is no longer a small business, but maybe a mid-sized business or potentially a large business, that it's going to keep them in the state, rather than not making their profits and leave?
We do that in a couple of ways. For grants, the grantees are required to submit regular reports to us. They're achieving milestones. Our funding is being given to them based on the achievement of milestones. So they're not getting the grant in one lump sum. It really is tranched, and it is performance and milestone based. When it comes to the early stage companies, we take a board observational role. So we're not directing them, but we are watching how the funds are being used. And there is a point at which the repayment of the loan is triggered. It's either at the end of 5 years, there's a balloon payment, or if they are able to raise around $5 million in a Series A. To be perfectly honest, if companies are struggling and they're not able to repay the loan essentially converts to a grant. So, we understand that we've taken a risk, and some companies will make it and some companies won't. With the tax incentives, we are monitoring, as I said, the job creation. If they're not 70% in the first year after the incentives, we can recommend to the DOR that they essentially claw back the incentives. So we spend a lot of time and energy on oversight. There are only 8 of us at the center, so we don't sleep very much. Center's open 24/7, but we have a lot of oversight requirements built into everything that we do. These are our collective tax dollars, and we take the stewardship very seriously.
You may want to expand on the follow-up question about what happens when they get large enough and leave the state, or how much control do you have? You don't have any control, obviously.
We don't, but our hope is that the other programs that we can make available would attract them to stay. By then, we know them, we're aware of what they are doing. We may be able, through the Mass Office of Business Development, to provide them support with site locations, etc. There's a company called Organogenesis in Canton, for example. That was poised to go to Rhode Island. The board wanted them to go. They were growing very quickly. We really wanted them to stay in Massachusetts. They applied for one of our grant programs in a very, very compelling use of those dollars. Our reviewers and board voted to give them that grant, and it deterred them from leaving. So they've stayed, they've made significant investment, they've doubled the size of the company in Canton. We were able to work together with the town of Canton to again sort of provide them with some good siting support. So we'll really kind of get together when companies reach a certain point and see what else we can do to entice them to stay.
Question?
I was just wondering if you could comment a little on the quality and quantity of the applications you've been receiving so far, especially in this economy.
It's a great question, and I think you won't be surprised to hear we are always oversubscribed. But that's a good message because it means that there's a great demand. The first round of the accelerator program, we received 88 applications. We were able to fund 7 of them. The good news is that Johnson & Johnson spotted 13 companies that were of interest to them. and decided that they would mentor and invest in those companies. And the second round, we received about the same number. We have just opened another round. We received 85 applications for our tax incentives. We were able to give tax incentives to 24 companies, ranging from very large companies to very small companies. So generally, you know, we're running about 100 applications. It's a very rigorous process. So, you know, we're generally funding maybe 10% of the applicants that we are getting, but again, that's because of the rigor of the process. It gives us a good reason to go back at different points and make the case that there's a lot of demand. We actually have more job creation potential from this round of the tax incentives, somewhat fewer companies, because I think they all realized they had to pony up and really deliver. But the job creation potential is actually higher than it was for the first round and we will make those awards in December. So we're getting very, very, very good participation.
Matt?
I'm convinced that this is a pretty successful program, and it seems like, as you mentioned, the funding mechanisms have been enshrined in legislation, so there's obviously broad-based support for the program. But my question is, are there political opponents who question success? Are there maybe concerns that pumping $1 billion into this sector is going to create a life sciences bubble that's not reflective of the real need of the market?
Indeed, there are members of the legislature who are not at all supportive of this. I won't call names at this point, but there are certainly some who have spoken out. There are candidates in the race for governor this year who have been very clear in saying that they don't think that we should be singling out particular sectors of the economy. So what we have tried to do as a good economic development entity is to make a business case for the use of these dollars, because we know that they compete. They compete with other use of dollars. They compete with services to cities and towns. They compete with funding for the schools. I mean, we are getting a share of the state's budget. Now, granted, we're an outside section, which means that we are not a line item in the state budget. We get funded only if the state has what's called a consolidated net surplus, which is an accounting artifact, and it sort of takes into consideration how much organizations plan to spend, how much they did spend, what we're owed from the federal government for matching programs like Medicare and Medicaid. And if there's a projected consolidated net surplus, it triggers our appropriation. We do not have a legislatively mandated appropriation. Every year, the legislature decides how much they are going to give us, up to our $25 million or up to a $50 million share of the state's bond cap. So we're singing for our supper every year. And we've been doing it basically with a business case that says we've invested this much, we've leveraged it by this much, we've created this many jobs. And by demonstrating how quickly this initiative will pay for itself in terms of job creation and returns to the coffers of the Commonwealth. So that's how we've chosen to justify our existence. So we've got legislative support, but there are really tough decisions being made right now. And as I said, unlike some of the other quasis or other programs, we have no guaranteed funding. It's each year depending on the priorities of the legislature.
Speaking for mass growth capital, in my thinking, we should not be dependent on the legislature after the first year. We've already started talking to agencies, other outside groups, to buy our loans, to recycle our funds. We should be recycling funds regularly. We should also be talking, we've also started talking to banks about the fact that banks don't like small loans on their portfolio because they have to set up reserves against them and don't like to manage them. And they should put money in a pool that we manage to do the same thing. So we're already started looking at ways that we can get around the legislature for those legislators who don't like the fact they can't control what we do, and they can't name the director or name directors and name the manager and steer money to their pet projects. So we're already looking at ways to how do we fund this, create capital that doesn't depend on the legislature after the first year.
We're doing the same. We're exploring the options that exist to see how we can make ourselves self-sustaining.
Question, Julia?
Julia Geisman.
I know you two represent very specific groups within the Massachusetts development, and there are numerous other agencies. The question I have is, it dovetails off of one of the other questions about life sciences. How does Massachusetts measure up to other states vis-a-vis business development in general, beyond life sciences, et cetera? Because it sounds, I'm not very informed on this topic, but it sounds to me like there's an enormous focus on bringing business development within Massachusetts. So I just wondered how it measures up.
We're ahead of some states and behind others. There's some states like New York are way ahead of us in terms of the number of agencies that provide funding. Wisconsin is way ahead of us, frankly. Ohio has more projects than we do. Some states we're way ahead of us, some states are way behind, but it just depends state to state. California probably can't even solve their problems, so we're way ahead of California. But I think that you have to just go to the state and look at what their need is. There's some southeastern states that haven't even begun down this road yet. They don't even have public financing projects, and so it's all dependent on private financing, and their development is lagging in ways that you would be surprised. So state to state, I would put us at the high fourth quartile.
With respect to life science, I'm sorry, the Milken Institute in California does a study where they're really looking at technology sectors and driving economy, and certainly in life sciences. As of last year, Massachusetts again was #1, but the closing of the gap between Massachusetts and other states in just a year was striking.
Let me follow up, Chuck, on that, because your suggestion is, and this follows up on the question, is it the case, from your perspective, that it's simply not an option for states not to be actively involved in economic development through these mechanisms if they're going to compete in this global economy? That you're suggesting that some states that don't do it are suffering as a result. So that the option that the state does not take an active role is just simply not an option any longer?
Yes, the answer to me is states are learning this, but the different factor is that there's been states have been dependent on stimulus money for the last year and a half, and it's a false security because that money is about ready to go away and not be. So they've depended on it. California will get $283 million of stimulus money in this next round, with Massachusetts may get 22. So some states that where they don't have an infrastructure are learning that they can't depend on the federal government. They've got to figure out on their own, and they've got to start at the base. They've got to start with the development of community development corporations in urban areas and in rural areas for development to really happen. You can't start at the top with development and expect it to work. You really do need to expect that local groups know what they need, they band together, they figure out what their needs are, they look at housing, development of economic neighborhood business districts, and they have to start at local nodes. You can't just impose it from the top because it doesn't work. So the states that have learned that are beginning to do more community development corporations, more local development corporations, and they're beginning to develop from the base up, which they should have done a long time. This state has probably the best infrastructure of community development corporations in the country. We have 56, I believe. We have 27 community health centers in the state. So we have a great infrastructure of local development already, and all this is working with it. It's not just reinventing it.
Hi, my name is Joan Murray, and my question is for you, Chuck, about the Mass Growth Capital Corporation. Given the current lending climate, is it more likely that these are going to be investments that are riskier investments that have a higher risk level? Is this going to be like a funding source of last resort?
I'm sorry, is it?
Is it kind of a funding source of last resort? Will these be higher risk investments?
Mass Growth Capital Corporation plans to make a range of investments available. We plan to make microloans available by making funds available to micro lenders. There's some good micro lenders around the state who don't have enough capital. For instance, in Western Massachusetts, the Western Mass Enterprise Fund is the best micro lender around. They need capital. We can provide them $1 million at a very, very favorable rate, so they can lend $5,000 here, $25,000 there, so forth. So we'll go around to the state, region by region, to figure out what we need to provide for loans in that region. Some of it may be through intermediaries, some of it may be directly, some of it may be through groups like like the CDCs. But we have to figure out what each region needs and then provide that range of funding through the best vehicle. The best lender is the local lender. That's why the community banks in the western part of the state have good track records and are failing. That's why the banks that are so removed from their lenders, their borrowers are failing. Because the community banks and small regional banks know their borrowers, they live in those communities, and so the best way to lend is a local loan. So our approach will be to hook up with and connect with local lenders where possible, make capital available to them, lend directly if need be, but provide capital to those lenders who are doing a good job. So it would be a full range of lending possibilities.
Yeah, and again, hopefully through the discussion, I've tried to make clear that we at the Life Sciences Center do not see ourselves in any way as an industrial last resort. We're looking for promising opportunities, promising young companies that need money, and we're really trying to bring together the best minds in the state from the business and scientific communities, including the community development corporations and the small business development centers. They also review for us. They bring us promising companies as applicants, and they help with our reviews. So we're looking to find the companies out there that are good bets. They represent a good use of the dollars, but they're risky right now. But they need money.
And I think with that, we'll end our evening. I'd like to thank our guests again for what I think everybody can agree was a very meaty conversation, because these are obviously very tough questions, especially the question of risk. Who has risk in an environment where, in fact, finding capital is no small matter? I just have one quick question before I give over to Barry if you want to make a few final comments, but and introduce next week. But does anybody in here support casino gambling? All right, I just want to check. As an economic development strategy, my mother, who's an inveterate Foxwoods goer, I guess is going to find that interesting side end here. Be interested to see whether that comes up next year with the legislature once again. Barry, you have any final comments? Good to hear about next week. Okay.
I want to add my thanks to my two dear friends here. I thought this was an incredible conversation. About one of the most important issues that the governor faces, and that is how do you do this? We had a fascinating conversation a week or two ago in a little seminar that Chris Basso runs with Nani Burns, who's now on our faculty in our school, former insurance commissioner. And it was about the film credit. And the argument, we actually have a very large film credit, or we have had one, about $125 million a year it cost us. We actually subsidize producers to do films. We've had 37 feature-length films in Massachusetts. If you saw The Town, that was one of them. But it was very difficult for people in that room to make the strong economic case for the film credit. It doesn't seem to create as many jobs. It doesn't seem to provide as much benefit to the state. And in fact, our dear friend Dan O'Connell, who was the former Secretary for Housing and Economic Development, the first one that Deval Patrick appointed, was at some loss of words to suggest why that particular tax credit was an effective one. And in fact, it turns out that many states now are kind of dialing back their film tax credits. My best example, I joked a little bit with Dan at this seminar, and I said, it's very interesting if you look at the film credit, it's very difficult to see on pure cost-benefit analysis, pure accounting, that we're getting as much bang for the buck out of that, as I might have said, as I think we get from the Mass Life Sciences Center, or I think we're going to get from the Mass Growth Capital Corporation. You just don't seem to be able to justify that. And he says, well, you've got to take into account a lot of the positive externalities, 37 films, beautiful overflights of the Zakim Bridge in downtown, as you saw in town. And this is the way we attract business, is by making Massachusetts seem like a great place to be. At which I quipped, I'm not sure that starting a film by saying Charlestown is the bank robbery capital is the best way to attract bankers to the state. A week later, I was watching some sporting event, about the only thing I watch on TV. But right after it, there is a new ABC program called Detroit 187. I want to make sure you do not tune in to watch it. But it has one of the Sopranos stars, Michael Imperioli, and he's terrific. But basically what this is a film of one homicide after another, usually black on black, and then they throw in a few Poles on Poles, because in my hometown of Detroit, we have a very large Polish population in Hamtramck, which is surrounded by Detroit. And my wife and I are both from Detroit, we're kind of spitting blood at this, thinking, God damn it, who's tearing apart our town, showing one homicide after another on this new hit TV series? And I thought that Dave Bing, who is a former NBA star with the Pistons and the mayor of the city of Detroit, should be suing ABC for that. And then I learned the state of Massachusetts is actually subsidizing the production of a film series that does as much damage to the city as I think some of the murders themselves do. So these are very, very tough issues. What I'm thrilled about, since I've had a chance to work with both of these people, is I think what we can be, in addition to absolutely magnificent presentations, be proud of the fact that here in Massachusetts we have such extraordinary individuals who are running these programs and doing it with such brilliance and such honor to the state and honor to all of us who pay the tax dollars. So I want to thank them. Next week, we take up a minor problem that no one worries about, healthcare policy. How do we pay for health care? And we are going to have an incredible two people joining us. Andrew Dreyfus is the CEO, actually fairly new CEO and president of Blue Cross Blue Shield of Massachusetts, the largest health insurer in the state. And we have Regina Herzlinger, who's a professor of healthcare policy at Harvard University. I think this will also prove once again how enticing are the subjects we bring to you here in the open classroom. Thank you very much for showing up. See you next week.